Hello, Solent University. My name is BC Wallin. I am the editor of Steve Jobs' monograph, the world's only book about the 2015 film Steve Jobs, starring Michael Fassbender, directed by Danny Boyle and written by Aaron Sorkin. I'm here to introduce the movie Steve Jobs to you and hopefully get some people to either see it for the first time or revisit it with a little bit of a new perspective. One of the things that we emphasized in this project is the idea that, movies sort of come and go. When we talk about movies, we are often stuck in the discourse of the day and the focus of what is everybody talking about right now. Steve Jobs got caught up in the conversations about isn't that isn't there another Steve Jobs movie? Which one is it? Who starred in it? Is that the one with Ashton Kutcher, etc.? There were also conversations around Hack from Sony. Steve Jobs was a Universal Pictures release, but it was originally supposed to be with Sony, and it was originally supposed to be with David Fincher and possibly Leonardo DiCaprio and Christian Bale and all these different aspects, to the point where the conversation became less about what the movie was and more about what the movie wasn't or could have been. So I think it's interesting to take a look at a movie and really think about it, 10 plus years on, and be able to revisit it without all of that noise and to focus in. What is Steve Jobs? Well, it's a biopic, but it is an unconventional structure for a biopic. We see so many of the same type of movie over and over again that start at the beginning of the life and end at the end. And you could just read Wikipedia. What are you gaining here? What Steve Jobs does is, Aaron Sorkin described it as less of a piece of journalism and more of a piece of art, a portrait, something that tries to capture in three different segments, how can you understand the life of somebody within a limited focus? It's sort of, we go back to Citizen Kane and Orson Welles. We can never truly understand the story of one person, so we can instead choose a focus and find a way in, and how are we going to understand and connect? You have different camera types, different music styles for each of the three pieces of this movie. And there are just a lot of details that you can pick up on. One of my favorite things about watching this movie, and I've watched this movie a lot of times, is that I almost think of it as a musical. Aaron Sorkin is known for his dialogue that is rat-a-tat, that is back and forth, very much going back to like your screwball comedy type days where people are just talking at hyper speed. And, I went back and watched like The West Wing, and even that, for me, it doesn't hit the highs of what Steve Jobs does, of this beyond humanity. People are responding before their brains probably could have even comprehended the words, and so they're hitting their marks and bouncing one off the other. It's a fascinating work to watch and to listen to. You can put this on without watching and just be absorbed into the audio. So my hope is that you find something that speaks to you, whether it's in the music, the costuming, the performance. There's so many details, and it's great to take a movie and say, let's appreciate it one piece at a time, or let's try to appreciate all of it. But let's appreciate it for what it is, take it on its own terms, and then see what we get out of it. I hope you enjoy.
I'm the only one who knows that this guy is someone you invented.
Is there a plan?
The plan will reveal itself to you when you're ready to see it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. We hope you enjoyed the screening of Danny Boyle's Steve Jobs. It's a really wonderful film. I've been looking for an excuse to show it for a long time, and we finally have one. We have a writer and editor. What do you use as your kind of moniker?
For this project, both.
Yeah. It's a really wonderful book. It's available now on Amazon. I've been such a fan of this film, and this was a really wonderful insight into a lot I didn't know about it, because it's quite an under-discussed. I mean, I think this quite often. I think it is not even the most one of the most underrated, but maybe the most underseen film, maybe of this century. And I was wondering, the first thing I wanted to ask you, we've just had the Oscars as this goes out. why is it, do you think, that we look back at often Sorkin projects and wonder why they went so underrepresented? Because you look at The Social Network as well, it's kind of a running trend of his films. You look back on them and they're a bit less appreciated than they should have been.
It's interesting that you ask from that framing. I feel like Aaron Sorkin he is one of the few people who has a presence in our culture as a writer. Screenwriters don't really get noticed or talked about by name so much. One of the essays in the monograph is about Sorkin and his role as a writer, but also auteur. And how can you have the concept of an auteur when, for a screenwriter, when that is something, even though it's the French term for author, it is generally something that's been ascribed since the days of Cahiers du Cinema, the French film critic magazine, especially in the 60s with Truffaut and Godard, etc. You know, the term of auteur has referred to the director, and the director as the sole voice. I don't know if I've noticed specifically Sorkin movies getting underrated. I think The Social Network is widely acclaimed and duly deserved. I see Moneyball is another movie that every so often comes up in the conversation. I'm sure in the UK it's a little bit less relevant because baseball is such a distinctly American experience and part of, you know, childhood and growing up and all that. I think Sorkin is somebody who he's doing things differently. And that is what will speak to people when they think about the art that doesn't get talked about, is what what are you getting from this guy that you're not getting from anybody else? Danny Boyle does the same thing. That there is no such thing as a Danny Boyle movie that doesn't have his touch on it in some way. Even a movie like this that's, you know, talking, so much talking, but you have these grace notes and moments in between where you see the audience, where you see the projections on the wall, all these different details. So I think Sorkin, like any other creative filmmaker or person who works in film, who gives you more than you think you're due from just an ordinary movie, that is something that's going to stick with you.
Yeah, that's I think that's very true. Um, you were speaking about the director often being the auteur, and obviously David Fincher, who did The Social Network, was attached to this project for a brief period of time. So what do you think Danny Boyle brings to the whole equation, and how does he kind of make this movie?
Danny Boyle has a few qualities that are very much seen, even though in ways it feels like he's trying to get out of the way of the script. But there is music is a very big part. One of the things that Charlie Brigden in their essay on music gets into is that the script actually has recommendations what Aaron Sorkin thought should be the songs in transitional moments between different acts, and music plays a big part in the story. I mean, Steve Jobs is a guy who changed the way that we experience music, and that's kind of teased at the end, in what I think is a beautiful moment in an ending that can be polarizing and that I have definitely gone both ways on. So music is integral to every one of Danny Boyle's movies, and you see it here. He chooses songs that are a little bit relevant to the milieu, but also just part of his taste and how he wants to create in atmosphere. I think somebody like Danny Boyle is a guy who, you know, puts these projections of the lyrics in Act One on the floor and on the wall. You see these little moments. He shoots through the wine glasses when Jobs is seeing Scully also in that scene. There are just these little moments that he breathes life into the experience. One of the things that I learned while researching the movie for the project is that they actually shot the movie like Birdman they were talking about, not, you know, fully, but there were these 10-minute long sequences of steady cam operation running through the bowels of, you know, the San Francisco Opera House, or you know, through these different venues where you have freedom that was given to the actors. Danny Boyle comes from a theatrical background, working in theater. He understands the value of rehearsal. Rehearsal is a huge part of the story of the making of this movie, that they had 3 weeks before they started the movie to just go over the movement and the lines, and then a week or two between each of the other acts. So those different aspects are all ways that, in small ways, he influences it. It very much has his fingerprints on it, inescapably, even as much as it's defined by the language.
I did actually want to ask you about rehearsals, because I read that in the book, and frankly I couldn't believe it, because it feels like such a pieced together and such an exact film. What do you think kind of the benefit of that was? And, you know, having someone like Michael Fassbender who has to learn all of Sorkadalo as a play, essentially.
My understanding of rehearsals, as somebody who's studied very little bit of acting, but also just from observing, how films get made, you see that rehearsal is both locking things in and it's freeing. When you are trying to think about what's the next thing am I going to say, what's the next thing that I'm going to do, there's a lot of those trying to just figure out. You can get lost in the mix. There are so many, anybody who has gotten up in front of an audience and sung, when you're paying attention to your pitch, to the words, to the pacing, to all these little details, the more that you have locked in and clear and understand what am I going to do, the more freeing it can be, because now those parts of your brain you don't need to over focus. Now, there is also a level of freedom, it seems, even in the filming, that the Steadicam operator talks about how he would have to basically improvise and follow the actors and go based off of their movement and what they were doing. Even if it was planned in one way, there were no lines, markers on the floor. They had the freedom to be a little bit more flexible. So I think there's that aspect. And then also, I think what rehearsal does for you is that it gives you the opportunity to try things. In film production, time is money is like this thing beyond anything. It's not just a saying, it is a reality. Every extra hour, every extra day, that is people, that is resources, that is spending that you need to account for. When you look at the work that a first AD will do to schedule and plan and get everything organized, there's so much that goes into it, and an extra day can be devastating to a budget. So having the opportunity to try things that won't work is incredible. It frees the actor, that they don't have to nail it on the first try, and they don't have to, feel that if I didn't get it today, I have now made trouble for this production.
Uh, yeah, so one of the things I wanted to touch upon, I don't really have a specific question for this, but we talked about the dialogue and the director and the music and how those intertwine. I think that really comes together in, for me, maybe the greatest scene of Sorkin's writing ever, which is Jeff Daniels in Act Two, the argument that they have.
You have done an outstanding job over the years of cultivating the press, and by that I mean manipulating them, because none of them, and none of their editors, publishers to this day know that you forced it, that you forced the board, even after I told you exactly what they do, which is exactly what they did, unanimously.
I don't have any trouble remembering that, John, because of it being the worst night of my life. And I forced the vote because I believed I was right. I still believe I'm right, and I'm right. No, I bled that night, and I don't bleed. But time's done its thing, and I really haven't thought about it in a while.
About, goes from the airport to Jobs' house to the underground, with the music rising behind. I think it's just utterly majestic. Is there anything you want to say about that?
It is the thing that you just, that you keep coming back to if you love this movie, or even if you don't think you love this movie. That's how I got into this movie. That, you know, in 2018, I started watching this movie in YouTube clips, and that was one of them. It was, Steve, Jobs and Wozniak arguing in Act 3. It was their argument in Act 2. It was the Russian roulette sequence in Act 1 with Andy. 5 out of 6 is your odds of surviving first round of Russian roulette. And it was the revenge sequence, as they call it.
Yeah.
10 minutes, incredible. It's so great. And I would recommend, if anybody really wants to deepen their relationship with this movie, or see how to make a movie, how much craft can go into something, this is it. Yes, you've got lighting, performance, location, the fact that they were in Steve Jobs' house, which, according to the production designer, according to Guy Hendrik Dias, Dias, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, but he said that they didn't know where that place was until they were doing some work in the garage. They were shooting in the original garage of Jobs for Act 1, and then they found on like a blueprint this address, and they found, the real home of Steve Jobs, and the owners, the new owners were like, yeah, sure, you could shoot there. But this feeling of they're recreating an iconic image from Time magazine of Jobs sitting on the floor with the Macintosh. So there's that. There's intercutting. I mean, the fact that you can tell a story that it's sort of two different arguments, and when you actually think about what they're arguing about, it's kind of not that exciting of material. Yeah. I was happy with the ad. You weren't happy with the ad. You were the CEO. I got pushed out of it. All that sort of stuff, the kind of stuff that when you read it in the news, you sort of think, do I really care? I don't know. Yeah, Steve Jobs is rich. He'll make it work. He'll figure it out. It is an impeccable work of craft of editor Elliot Graham, of composer Daniel Pemberton, and it's just going over and over and over again. And the thing that I think is very important, especially if you're young and you're thinking about film, you're thinking about writing, you're thinking about any of the different elements, is to keep in mind that all of this, we're seeing the final product. This was work and work and work and work and work. It took so much tinkering and fixing until it could sing, as they said. They needed to get it right. And it is so hard to get it right. And it's so hard to estimate, what are people going to lose track of and how are they paying attention? It's an impeccable work of craft, and I really think it is worth highlighting and thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, it has got that thing I think the perfect movies have, when you have such a coming together of incredible people. You've got Gore's direction, Sorkin's writing, obviously, but then you've got, the editing, and Daniel Pemberton, who I think is a incredibly underrated director. I also just want to highlight the I think the thing that makes it work is that there are these very kind of Sorkinistic asides to kind of break up the pacing. One of my favorite lines in the film is my shit's still somewhere in Beijing. He throws that in the middle. That's wonderful. Just to speak to the thing you said about the Wikipedia page, I think the thing I found most interesting upon watching this for the first time was learning that Jobs wasn't always a success at Apple, because obviously we kind of have this image of him as this great kind of wonderful, and I think actually Michael Fassbender not looking exactly like Jobs throughout the film kind of helps to that, because it's kind of a new image. But to that, what I find interesting is it's not a Wikipedia page. It's a very stylized story, but it is still so informative to the time. And I think it says a lot to that you've been able to put together a book about it. It's not, it works into those kind of biopic, what some would call trappings, while still having its own distinct voice. Filmmakers going forward, obviously we've got a lot of biopics. And the thing I find interesting is we've got Danny Boyle doing Ink this year with Jack O'Connell about I've forgotten his name, but the editor of The Sun, and Aaron Sorkin doing The Social thing. The Social thing. I feel really bad. I could not remember. Social Network is one of my favorite films, and I like the films of Danny Boyle, so I've got a lot of. I was kind of wondering Um, do you have any worries about that? Do you think they can recreate it, or what would you suggest that they kind of take from this? It's a big
Um,
question.
I each of them I have worries and assurances, and I don't know. I think Aaron Sorkin works best when he has a director with
Mm,
him, somebody to collaborate with. This is a lesson that all great filmmakers sort of run into in their career, is that the more prestige they have and the less people feel comfortable sharing their piece, that is gonna cause more problems down the line. I think that people love to create this image of the auteur director, the person who knows everything. I listened to the commentary of Steve Jobs on the Blu-ray. There are two on there, and one of them is between Aaron Sorkin and Ellie Graham, the editor. And there's probably some element of joking there, but there is a lot of Sorkin asking Graham, "Hey, why did you cut out this scene that I wrote? Why did you cut out this part?"
oh,
And
wow.
you can actually read the script and see that there are moments, and every scene that didn't make it into the movie that I read the script, I kind of go, "Yeah, I get that. I see why they took that out. It either took away from the flow, or it defocused, or it was so specific about certain things that weren't needed." The lesson of Steve Jobs and most great biopics is that you need to have some sort of lens, a take, a perspective, a something. Bring something to it, and don't just, plop a camera down and record. Don't just start at the beginning and end at the end, and that's it. There's got to be more to it. Danny Boyle also did a great biopic of 127 Hours. Aaron Ralston, a guy
Yeah,
who got stuck with his arm under a boulder, and it is fully focused within that sequence. There's a lot of Aaron Ralston's life. He wrote a memoir about it, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and it's about how all of his life was leading up to that moment and all of these different things. Great. But within the context of a movie, there are limitations to our patience and to our interest. And if we really wanted to know everything, we'd just read Wikipedia or a
yeah,
great biography. There's the Steve Jobs biography that this is based on by Walter Isaacson. I think it's a great read. It's got so much in it. And once you've read that and then approach this movie, you can see all those different names and details and things that are pulled out, where, Sorkin is creating a reality where you can sort of see how it's like what they talk about Star Wars, right? Everything that exists outside of the frame, that is
yeah.
not, that doesn't have to be explained. Who's Dan Kotke? Who's Susan Kerr? The different names and things that pop up, Izzy Miyake, all of that different stuff is great. There's a reason why a biography is a biography and a biopic is a biopic. And sometimes I think that people who make biopics should kind of just stop until we can sort it out and figure out what's
Yeah.
going on. But there's a lot to learn if you can find a focus and find something to say, and something to say that I wouldn't get by just reading the plain history of it.
Yeah. And I think Sorkin and Boyle are two very good people at finding that kind of lens. So I've got a lot of hope for both Ink and The Social Reckoning. Yeah, just a couple more questions to ask you. The main thing I want to ask is, this is a film of really wonderful performances. Obviously, you have the kind of tentpole in Michael Fassbender, but more often when I think about the film now, after hundreds and hundreds of rewatches, I'm thinking about Seth Rogen and Jeff Daniels and Catherine Waterston and Kate Winslet, and Fassbender and Winslet both nominated for Oscars for this, I believe.
Yeah.
But but yeah, what would you say today? Because it's such a massive cast of speaking roles, if you think about it. Very important people.
Yeah, there's some incredible performances, and each person brings something unique to it. Each of them is they're coming in to have an argument with Steve Jobs and then leaving for the most part. I think that there's a lot to gain from them. The essay that Sarah J. Lieber wrote in the monograph about performance focuses on the idea of status, that there is, high status and low status in performance. How are you as a performer relating to others? Are you trying to make them feel lesser so you can seem bigger? Are you trying to meet them where they are? That's a really cool aspect. But I think, to me, the performances come down a lot to musicality. right? It's that same thing of that you can listen to it because they find this way, this rhythm into the reading. I just think it's great, and I think that the movie can be a great jumping off point for finding certain people that you want to see more of. Seth Rogen does an incredible job
Mm.
here as a dramatic performer,
Well, he's also
and
got.
yeah,
Sorry, just to what you were saying, I was thinking that the kind of comedic beats and the kind of rhythm that you
yes,
have to do good comedy really helps him with the pentameter, I think, very well.
oh yeah, big time.
Yeah, yeah.
I yeah, I think that Michael Stuhlbarg as Andy Hertzfeld, he was somebody that I really appreciated, and he's got this performance that is so like unself-conscious. He's okay being nebbish, being this beaten down, engineer who can be low to Jobs's high, and seek out other great Stuhlbarg performances. A Serious Man, of course,
Yeah.
comes to mind first of all, but he's done great work with Luca Guadagnino and other
Mm,
roles as well. I think that there is a murderer's row of talent. I'm also very interested to see. I haven't seen a lot of performances from the different actresses who played Lisa, but each of them has something great going on, and you sort of wonder, can we get more of that magic in another performance? Uh, they all have it. This movie is stacked.
it's so interesting to me to well, obviously they are because we know how films are made, but to think about the fact that they are different actresses, when she's got that um the stuff at the beginning when she says when they're having the conversation about wanting it to say hello, and then in the second part the Joni Mitchell conversation, and then at the end with the her complaining about what he said about the Lisa. Those are three different actors, and yet they're all going toe to toe with Fassbender in a pretty incredible way. And they're not, it would be very easy for them to be the weaklings, I think, but they're just so
Oh yeah.
impressive.
Oh yeah, and there are highs and lows between the different performances, and you can sort of see some that stand out in certain moments over other, but each of them at different points do definitely hold their own. It's some great child performances that they were able to get, and also the at age 19, I guess wouldn't be classified as a child performance, but still each of them,
Mm.
none of them are name performers compared to who they're with, but they all hold their own.
And actually, as we were talking, I've just remembered somebody that I always forget, which is Sarah Snook, like one of our great actresses who just got. I didn't even know. I only watched Succession fairly recently, and I genuinely didn't notice her at all until I watched it post Succession. And when she's just incredible, and she works so well in that dynamic that she's placed in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, her, also John Ortiz, people who like to certain audiences, it's like, whoa, big names. But yeah,
Yes.
Sarah Snook at the time, she didn't have Succession, and she's the person who turned off the exit signs. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
every person who interacts has something cool to offer.
yeah. I just want to say, actually, when you're talking about obviously the exit signs referring to the product launches and all of this, I didn't realize until I read this book, and I never really thought about it, I guess, but the licensing issues with Apple about certain thing, and the fact that it doesn't fall under permission, it falls under fair use, their use of
Yeah.
the advert. And so I found that so interesting. Could you speak a bit to that and what was?
Yeah. So one of the
Yeah.
things that I learned while researching is there's a nice extensive Hollywood Reporter article for anybody who's interested in the messy version of the history of the making of this movie. One of the things that it documents is that Apple did not want to allow the movie to show the Ridley Scott directed ad 1984. And they had to show what they could from, fair use, from availability, that it is, you can use certain pieces of publicly available materials without showing the whole thing, and that you're using it for artistic purposes. I think that it shows something interesting about, there are biopics and movies that are subject approved, and those, there's always a little something to them that you have to look at them with a critical eye and say, is this really giving me the full picture? Is this really, I think people knew going into it that if Aaron Sorkin's writing it, you're going to have somebody, the main character, very much like Social Network. You're not necessarily going to love them at all moments, and there was just an assumption about what this project was going to be. It seems like a lot of the people who were upset about it hadn't actually seen it when they were commenting about it. Tim Cook and Aaron Sorkin had a little back and forth in the press. That was another distraction from the movie.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think what you can see is that you don't need approval to make great art. The Monograph was a project that I wasn't able to get anybody at Universal or from the production of the movie to talk to us, but we went ahead and did it, and we wrote about a movie that was interesting to us. We put together a project of everybody bringing a different perspective and everyone having a lens to look at the movie through, because each person who approaches something, they have their own perspective, they have their own thing to bring to the project, to understanding, to creating. So I think that it's kind of nice that Steve Jobs as a movie didn't have approval, because it was able to do things that it didn't ask permission for, and it just did it.
So yeah, this is just such a wonderful book. I've read a decent amount of it, and it is so nice to see someone like yourself, but also the other essayists who write in it, really having the love and care to put into something that I think is criminally underrated and criminally undervalued. It's available on Amazon in paperback. It's a very nice book, and I hope that some of you go out and read it and be inspired by this. The last thing I want to ask, because we'll have a lot of film students in the audience and a lot of creatives, what would your kind of last word on this film be? Like, what do you think young creatives and creatives of all ages should take away from something like this?
Take a look at the movie. Take a look at the figure that is being represented, the image that he's trying to create. We all love the idea of a guy who is the creative, the genius, the innovator, somebody who is the singular vision behind a thing. Now take a look at the demystification that is at work. You can see in the movie that he has genius ideas. The realization of, the importance of your fingers as creative tools versus using a stylus that creates limitation, recognizing in Wozniak's watch what people will accept and what people won't accept, knowing all of these different, understanding intuitively how people interact with things. Incredible. But then look at the image he's trying to create as a guy who doesn't acknowledge the team that built the Apple II, the product that is the reason for the success of Apple up until the point that he steps in the third act, where he wasn't in the room for that. You have the Macintosh was a project that a guy, Jeff Raskin, his first name is spelled Jef. I always just think that's interesting. He was the lead of that project. He also had a funny quote where he said that Steve Jobs would have made a wonderful king of France, which the joke I think is partially that there is no king of France, but that's like part of the his weird sort of way of thinking, which is not an intuitive understanding for people, right? Steve Jobs comes in and takes over the Macintosh. All of these different things, all of these launches, everything where you see a story being told and you see something that feels seamless. There are seams, there are wires, there are workarounds and fake outs and tricks that had to go through the process to be able to get there. It is very rare to be able to get somewhere creative and interesting alone. And I would kind of say it's impossible. It really is. There's some element that you're going to require somebody else. Somebody has to print the book. Somebody has to shoot the film. Somebody has to hold the camera while you're acting in front of it. You could try to be the single vision and executor of your vision. It's never going to be the same as when you have other perspectives and you share with others and you acknowledge others and you learn from them and you collaborate with them. If you are a creative, if you are a writer, a filmmaker, a storyteller, if you are somebody who wants to be involved in this, meet other people, learn from them, offer what you have, accept what they have too. Don't try to be the only voice in the room, because what that does is it takes away oxygen from the creativity that is out there. There are so many people with so many things to offer. And I think that when you look at the making of a movie like this, you look at all these stories that are part of the reality behind the icon Steve Jobs, even the black turtleneck that somebody else made to be iconic for him, every detail of it, you're going to need other people. So be somebody who can work with other people.
Wonderful. One of my favorite images in the film is some worker taking a crowbar to the back of a Mac. Just it's a beautiful routine just to try and get it working. is so wonderful. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for what you've done with this book and all of this. I think it's a real inspiration, and it means a lot to a lot of people who have spent years in the dark trying to talk about this film. So yeah, it's really wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us and for sharing this.
Thank you for having me.